Hello and welcome back to Titanic Talkline. I am Alexia, and this week I am joined by Claes-Gören Wetterholm, a name that, if you are familiar with the Titanic community, I'm hoping that you'll recognize. Hi, Klaus. How are you today?
I'm fine. I'm fine. It's
I'm
sorry.
uh, sorry. I was just going to say I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah. It's getting dark here in Sweden.
Is it
Because
really?
yeah, but in 5 days it will change, start going lighter again.
Well, that'll be nice. It's still
Yeah.
in the process here of being, the sun starts going down at 2 o'clock in the
Mhm,
afternoon, and it's
We know.
awful,
Awful.
pretty awful. But
But you
I
have no
would,
snow.
yeah,
We do.
no snow yet.
We have a lot of snow.
Oh, you have a lot of snow. We haven't had any snow here yet.
Oh, bless you.
Oh, I mean, I like the snow. To me, it doesn't feel like really winter until there's been at least a snow.
Here it's been minus 10 Celsius this morning.
Oh,
Yeah.
good
Oh,
God.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a little miserable.
hmm
Oof. Uh, anyway, sorry. I'm gonna ask you my standard question just because I'm curious. What is your personal Titanic story? You've written so many books.
hmm
You're part of the Titanic Exhibition. Like, your name is like synonymous with Titanic. But what's your well, as they ask the superheroes, what is your origin story?
If you mean my interest that started,
Yes.
yeah, it began in 1960.
Hmm.
Um, there was a program in Swedish television, which it was an English program. The Swedish television had bought it from BBC, and it was called
Hmm.
Time to Remember. And sometime in the program, the name Titanic was mentioned. So I asked my father, "What is Titanic?" And then he went to the encyclopedia, as he always did, and read up what Titanic was. Years later, he said he regretted he had read this to me, but that's another story. Uh, then, many years later, in this video shop in London, I was looking for Titanic DVDs, and over this shelf, I saw something called Time to Remember. And I said to myself, it
Hmm.
couldn't possibly be this film I saw 50 years ago. But I bought the film and went to my friends in South London and said to Diana and Eric, if this is the film, if this is the program that I saw so long ago, it begins with this pendulum clock. So we started the film and there was the pendulum clock. So it was. So I timed it. When is Titanic mentioned first? And
Hmm.
therefore I know that my interest in the Titanic began 20 minutes to 9 on the 21st of October 1960.
That's incredible.
Yeah, but it's actually true. I've timed it and it's 10 minutes, then they mention Titanic, and that's when it all started. And
That's
from then
amazing.
on, it's been an incredible journey, and it's not over yet.
I was gonna say first of all, it can't possibly be over, and secondly, I'm sure there's 100 million fascinating stops along
Oh,
the
yes.
road
Yeah.
between
Oh, yeah.
there and now. I guess, like, how did how did you decide, from an interest in Titanic, just from an interest, because there's a lot of people, myself included, who
Mm.
have that interest in Titanic. When did you decide that's like, I'm gonna write a book about this? This is a thing I'm gonna dedicate my
Yeah.
time and resources and energy to.
I had gone into the public archives in the early 1980s because of a friend of mine, now
Hmm.
deceased. And then I started with the ambass- embassies in, for example, in the US and England. But
Right.
then it came to my mind that there is something called the consulate archives. So I ordered all those capsules, and when I opened them, there was like a cross, a black cross over the paper. So I went to the dustbin and dusted it away, and the guard looked at me and wondered, "What are you doing?" I said, "These are rubber bands from 1912." So
Wow.
nobody had been looking into this archive since it was put there in 1912. So it was like an archaeological ex, expedition, really. And I found an amazing amount of material, letters, and so on. And then I did the same in Norway, and I went into the archives of Finland and Denmark. And so the first book in 1988 covered all the Scandinavian passengers,
Wow.
209, I think. So it's a lot of people. So in my first book, I had biographies on everybody.
Hmm.
It almost killed me. It was an incredible task, and there was no internet, no nothing.
Right.
No, but this was also thanks to an exhibition I made with the Maritime Museum here in Stockholm in 1987, when we went out in the press and asked for support, and we got over 200 answers, and very many of them were relatives of Titanic passengers.
Wow.
And so then I escorted our last Swedish survivor to a meeting in Boston in 1988, and there I met 10 survivors.
Wow.
And then from then on, I was introduced to this man, George Tullock,
Hmm.
who had then been out on the Titanic for the first recovery expedition.
Yes, yes.
And we started talking, and there was a request from the Maritime Museum in Stockholm to make an exhibition with erased artifacts. And we actually turned out to become the first museum in the world to do it on a large scale. So in
Wow.
1991, we had this exhibition called Treasures of the Titanic. And I can assure you that the museum was swamped, was stormed.
I bet.
In 6 weeks, there were 66,000 people coming in to a museum that usually has 50,000 people throughout the year.
Oh my gosh.
And because this was an incredible help to George,
Hmm.
he was from then on ever grateful for what I done and what we had done. So then I was invited to 4 expeditions to the Titanic, starting in 93. So 93, 94, 96, and 98, I went
Hmm.
down. I've not
Wow.
yet been diving to the ship, but everything in life is question of time, I guess.
Hmm.
But I had the enormous privilege of seeing all these artifacts, thousands of them coming up,
Yeah.
investigating them, holding them, photographing them, everything you could think of. So, because of that, I'm quite used to all these artifacts that have come up. Because of these, I was asked by a couple of people in Germany to make a very large exhibition in Hamburg in 1997 with them.
Ooh.
So I worked in Germany and Switzerland from 96 till 2000. Then this resulted actually in a couple of people from Spain who contacted my German director, uh,
Hmm.
Reinhard, and he contacted me and said he had been approached by some people in Spain who had an exhibition,
Right.
and he added, and they are good people. And if Reinhard said they are good people, I believed it. So they came to Stockholm. We started talking, shook hands, and then I put a couple of um, artifacts into their exhibition. And then I usually joke by saying that when I started working with this company, Musealia, we had
Hmm.
one lorry, and now we have 6 because it's grown, and it's been in I don't know how many countries now. So I worked with them. Next year is going to be 20 years. So
Wow.
it's actually a family company, and they become like my own family. I'm part of the family, and they are part of my family. So we become very close friends, and we work a lot together. And it's fantastic how you can connect.
Hmm.
I usually say that Titanic takes you anywhere, and
Yeah.
Titanic brings people together,
Yes.
like you and me here.
Yes.
Mm. So
That's
you
so
can
true.
you can sit down with somebody who has shared this interest, somebody you've never talked to before in your life, and you will talk immediately. You will
Yeah.
become friends immediately. You will have different opinions, yes, but you
Sure.
certainly have this incredible interest. Now, I'm an ethnologist as well, so
Hmm.
um, my interest is not only the fascination of the Titanic, but I'm interested in the interest and how the Titanic became big. So, one of my books published here in 2008 is called "The Ship of Saga" or "The Ship of Dreams" or something like that, and it's about the myths and the money and the people because
I
money
need
is
to get a copy of that immediately.
and the Titanic was for sale from day one. From day
Yes.
one, you could buy
Yes.
postcards, and within a week you could buy books, prints, there were records, music sheet, there was symphonies um, written and composed, and so on and so on and so on. So
There was
from,
a movie made.
yeah, two movies in 1912.
Mm-hmm.
One movie inspired by this in 1913 in Denmark. And so it goes on and on and on. So you have the 1929 movie, 1943, 1953, 1958, and so on and so on, up
Yeah.
till um, Cameron's Titanic movie.
Yeah.
Um, he actually came to our exhibition in let's see, 98, because the premiere of the film in Germany took place in our exhibition in Hamburg.
Wow.
I took him around there twice. Let's say that we have different opinions of a lot of things.
Sure.
It was fun to talk to him, and I think he liked talking to somebody who also had some knowledge. But
Yeah.
we have different opinions, very much, I'd say. But it was fun talking to him, and he was very kind, very nice. And the Titanic movie, I usually say, is the best Titanic movie ever made about what never happened.
Yeah.
Sorry about that, but I do believe it. As a Titanic historian, I shouldn't go into destroying people's experience of the film, because it's just outrageously good. It's fantastic.
Right. It's one of those. I bring this up a lot on my show because I talk to
Mm,
both people
mm,
who are, deeply embedded in the historical side,
yeah,
and
yeah.
people who are very, very deeply in love with the film. And I
Mm,
kind of come in between. I was 8 when the movie came out, so
ah,
it was easy for me to get very stuck in that
mm, mm,
Titanic, and I did. So that's how I initially came to it. But something you mentioned earlier, is what kept me involved, is that Titanic is very much a human story, whether it
mhm,
be about the
mhm,
passengers, the crew, the survivors, the victims, or the people currently involved.
yeah.
Because I have a personal interest, but not the knowledge, in why it's big too. And that's why I really loved Stephen Beale's book, Down with the Old Canoe, which is about
Yes.
the cultural
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
would love to see one about sort of the modern, because that was written, quite some time ago.
Mm,
I'd love to see one now that tackles the post Cameron film
mhm,
world, because I do
mhm.
believe that in some very interesting way, it completely shifted the landscape of Titanic's future.
Yes, it certainly did, and it was absolutely hysterical then. Um, Part of this hysteria has now gone disappeared, which I'm grateful for. But if I, it's difficult to say, almost impossible to say how many books, for example, have been published. But I think that since the wreck was discovered in 1985, at least one book a week has appeared. At least one book for 40 years. Uh,
Wow.
so between 2011 and 2012,
Hmm.
I know how many books have been published because I've bought them, and it was a disaster to my wallet, but never mind. Uh, Over 330 books. So
Wow.
there was one new Titanic book every second day for 2 years.
Jeez.
Yeah, I know. It's incredible, but I have them here, all of them.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an incredible amount of. If I turn my computer a little, and I just show you a little part of the Titanic library, it goes like this. Yeah.
Wow.
And it goes into the other rooms as well. So,
This is an entire wall of a room.
yeah, but there are more walls. Now, there are no more walls, so I can't buy any more books. Can't.
Space is at
Yeah,
an end.
yeah. But it's interesting that you mentioned the human story, because the exhibition that I work with, we have a name within the company saying it's the human story of the.
Hmm.
It's really, we've connected a person's story with a photo of the person and an artifact from this person.
Right.
We tell the story of certain individuals combined with something, for example, a wallet that was found on this person's body, or a letter that was sent from the Titan, like First Officer Murdoch's letters. We show them in the exhibition. That's just one example.
I really want to see those.
I have here, this is going to go into the exhibition, but this here has not yet come that far. This is a wallet from third class passenger. It was Swedish Maurits Ådahl. And I've
Wow.
just gotten it on loan from his granddaughter.
Wow.
So I can open it carefully, but it's in fairly good condition. So you can't see much, but in this wallet they found paper, a notebook, they found out other stuff there, plus this
Wow.
watch and a few more things. So this
That's
one goes
incredible.
into the exhibition. So it's because I'm here in Stockholm and part of the archive is in Spain because we are going to plan a new exhibition now. So this wallet you just saw goes into the new exhibition where I'm going to tell the story of Maurits Ådahl.
Wow.
And he's interesting because he's just one example that when I got in contact with his grandchildren, they said to me that their mother's greatest hope and wish in life was to go to Halifax to his grave and put flowers on the father's grave. And I was a bit, I didn't know what to say, but I just said, well, I'm sorry, but there
Yeah.
is no grave. His body was found, yes,
Yeah.
but he was buried at sea.
Buried at sea.
So um, possibly his widow couldn't speak to the children and grandchildren about this because it was just too much. But I added, this was in 1987, I said
Mm-hmm.
that if I ever get the chance, I promise I will put flowers on your grandfather's grave. So in 1994, when I was asked by George to go out on the second expedition, I said,
Mm-hmm.
would it be possible to have flowers put on the spot uh,
Mm-hmm.
in memory of Maurits Ådahl? And he said, fine. So they arranged actually with a large wreath, and I didn't know how to travel with this because it was so big. But I had it in hand luggage, and the people on both Lufthansa and TAP Air were very kind. So they took this large wreath and put it in the pantry on the airplanes. And I flew down to Punta Delgada on the Azores, and then the ship was waiting there. And
Mm-hmm.
we put it in the cold store. It took 4 days to go out to the Titanic.
Wow.
The first evening, when the submersible had been down and placed so-called transponders of the wreck,
Mm-hmm.
it was evening. We gathered the whole crew on the stern. It was a starlit night, absolutely calm, absolutely flat calm, and very, very peaceful. So I had written a text that was translated into English and French,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a friendship. And then me, Captain Telbo, and George read Swedish, French, and English. Then me and the captain took the wreath and put it into the ocean. And at the same time, the whistle on the ship blew. And I wasn't prepared for that. So it
Mm-hmm.
was very, very emotional. And then I sent a fax, actually, via satellite to one of the grandchildren saying that tonight and such hour, we have put flowers on your grandfather's grave. And I'd say that the whole expedition became a bit different because suddenly it was not just raising artifacts. It was about the story of somebody who had lived and died there. It was a real story.
Yeah.
So in the autumn of that year, one of these grandchildren, Hjördis, was invited by George to come to London when this large exhibition opened at the National Maritime Museum.
Right.
And then she asked me if it was possible to go and see a little part of this documentary that was made aboard during the expedition but cut away in the end, where
Mm-hmm.
we took the wreath and put it in the ocean. So I called the producer and he said, fine, Claes, of course. So we traveled out to Chelsea in London, to a small film studio, and there he showed us this part where
Mm-hmm.
we took the wreath and placed it in the water. And of course, Hjördis was crying a lot, and after that, she has been saying all the time that my grandfather's funeral took place in a small film studio in London.
Mm. Yeah.
And because of this, the story changes, it becomes larger, it's like waves on the water, and it grows because it's not just a person, it's a story of so many other things, actually.
Yeah.
And I met Hjördis. She's quite old now. I had a lecture down in the South Sweden, and she came there to listen. So it was fantastic to tell the story again and show the pictures for her and the audience about her grandfather.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
it's
and
incredible.
there's also something else one should not forget, and that is the Czechish author Milan Kundera. He
Mm-hmm.
writes in one of his novels. He writes that as long as you mention somebody's name, this person is alive.
Mm-hmm.
He lives with us. And therefore, by mentioning Mauri Sordal, although he's gone, he still lives. He's with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this with all the Titanic people. They will always be with us. They will always be alive. Their stories will be told, even though it's a short one. We tell their stories.
Mm-hmm.
And because memory is the most valuable thing we have, we must remember, because that makes us human.
There's Have you seen the movie Coco, the Pixar film?
No, not yet. I know what
It
you're talking about. Yes,
Yes,
yes.
it's a beautiful movie, and one of the it takes place in the mythical land of the dead,
Mhm,
on Dia de
mhm,
los
mhm,
Muertos.
mhm,
For anyone also who's listening who doesn't know, and there's a section where one of the main characters talks to the other about the concept of memories in the afterlife, and
mhm.
he, after watching, sorry, tiny spoilers, this movie's been out for a while,
Don't
but
worry.
they watch this, a skeleton vanish, and this little kid go, well, where'd he go? What happened to him? And the adult has to tell him, when there's no one left in the living world to tell
Mhm,
your story,
mhm.
you disappear from this world.
Yeah.
And that's why it was important to put up the altar, and to
Mhm,
remember to speak the
mhm,
name, to tell the
mhm,
story, to keep the name alive, because you're right. As long as people discuss it, it it's still there.
mhm.
It's still a part of the the fabric of
Yeah.
what's happening.
Someone said to me that you die twice. First when you die, and the second time, the last time your name is mentioned.
Yes, that's what they call it in the movie Coco. He says it is the second death.
Mm, correct. So I feel that by writing about these people that I've done for so many years, it's a way of keeping the memory alive everywhere. Because the story of the Titanic is so big and so great, you can only tell fragments of it, parts of it. If I meet young people and they say, I've read all books, I said, fine. I haven't, and I will never do, because
Mm,
it's just so much.
it's impossible.
It's impossible. And there, if you search Titanic on the internet, for example, Google, you will get hun- I don't know, hundreds of millions of hits. Yeah.
From every direction.
Mm,
It's it's such it in a good and a bad way. It's become such a part of the culture.
mhm,
After the movie came out, it became, lines from the movie became quotable in the same way that, frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn, and
mm,
all those other iconic lines. Now people have added,
yeah.
I'm king of the world and I'll never let go. And it becomes, it has become part of the pop culture. And
Mm,
on the one hand, that's great because it creates this, as we say, it keeps the memory
mm,
alive. But on the other hand, I think a little bit, maybe you disagree with me, but I think sometimes it gets a little bit away from the human story at times. It becomes a
mm.
little bit more about almost everything else,
Yeah.
if that
In
makes sense.
in ethnology, we speak about something that is in German called gesunkenes Kulturgut, which means
Mm-hmm.
something has sunken into the general agenda, so to speak, the general
Mm-hmm.
knowledge. So if you say Titanic, anybody in the world would know what we're saying because it's become part of everybody's knowledge.
Right.
And go to ask children in the Amazonas or Philippines or America, wherever on the globe, and you say, mention a boat, and they say Titanic, because it's just such a big part of common knowledge now.
Yeah,
So and you have as many inputs as you have people in on the globe.
that's also
Billion.
true.
Yeah.
I like to ask people this question because I think it's not because it's controversial, but just because I like to know people's opinions. But I know that especially now, there's a lot of discussion about, that it's more accessible, and you know, there's been changing in, the global climate, etc. What do
Mhm.
you think should be done with the wreck now, starting in the year, 2022? Nothing that's been done can be undone, but what do you think should be done with it now going forward?
There's not much you can do because Mother
True.
Nature is going to destroy everything that a human being has constructed will be
Hmm.
harmed sooner or later. So, in the end, the engines will stand there like uh, um, something like the ocean's cathedral. I mean, a cathedral standing on 3,800 meters depth.
Yeah.
And you can't do anything to that because the ship will disappear sooner or later. She will.
Hmm.
And that's why it's so important that we keep the stories alive.
Yeah.
We tell the stories on and on again. That- And I have, well, quite a few objects. And I say, like friends, for example, in England, that we are custodians. We
Hmm.
keep them. They will stay there. We pass away. We disappear. We die. But it's our task to treat these objects as possibly careful as we can, to
Yeah.
pass them on to the next generation. So this is what we're doing, for example, with the exhibitions.
Hmm.
That we keep them there, we show them there, we tell the stories there, and that's how we pass them on. There are many, many collectors on the Titanic, but most of them never show their stuff. They're just kept with them. But I feel we should show them, but treat them with dignity and be very careful with them uh, all the time.
Yeah.
But the wreck itself will disappear.
Yes.
I have personally nothing against raising objects from the actual wreck. I don't
Hmm.
mind that at all. No. Um, there is a lot of controversy. There was a lot of controversy when this company, Ormus Titanic, wanted to bring up the Marconograph, the
Right.
station. But I don't mind that because it's better to show these artifacts and tell the story about these brave wireless officers, operators, and particularly Jack Phillips and what he did
Yeah.
that. Right? It's better to show this thing, and then we will remember him. There's one thing showing pictures.
Yeah.
There is a completely different thing to show a three-dimensional object. It's quite different. We have the warship Vasa here in Stockholm, which is Sweden's foremost tourist attraction. It's a ship that sank in 1628 and it was
Wow.
raised in 1961, and it's on display since. And the whole ship is on display,
That's incredible.
including bodies found on the ship. Yes, I know, but
It
they
would
are there.
never happen in the United
I
States.
know, I know, I know, but they're there. They're on
Oh, I
display. Of
don't
course.
think it's a terrible idea. I'm just thinking, oh man, you try to do that in this country, you'd
Mm,
have a that would be
mm.
a civil war starter.
Yeah, but we do. People are. You go and see them and see. Okay, there are skeletons in
Sure.
these, showcases, but
Yeah.
nothing more. And then the heads have been reconstructed, so you can see how they looked like back in 1628.
Wow.
So therefore, I feel it's more important to show this warship and tell the
Hmm.
story, and we learn so much about the 17th century through the rating of this ship. And
I agree.
it's all they have over 1 million visitors a year. Yeah. So if you go to
Wow.
Stockholm, it's a must. It is a must.
Yeah, I want to go see that now.
You should.
I
It's
should.
fantastic.
I'd love to come to Sweden,
Yeah,
but
I take people around the us and I say when they come through the doors, I say, remember that come through the doors. It's going to be what you're
intense.
going to see now will stay on your vision, so to speak, for the rest of your life. And I've
Yep.
seen people taking steps back and people saying, "Oh my God," because it's so awesome to see the whole ship.
Yeah. It
Incredible.
it sounds stunning. Like,
It is
not
stunning. It is
it
stunning.
literally stunning.
Mhm.
And you're very right about the necessity of tactility to
Mhm.
learn. I'm
Mhm.
I'm an extremely touch driven person. I can look in pictures all day. And pictures are wonderful. I mean, I have
Mhm,
a print of Titanic behind me,
mhm,
some beautiful photos in the world.
mhm,
I saw a photo the other day that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a thunderstorm taken from space. It
mhm,
was
mhm,
fascinating. And
mhm.
photography can tell you so much,
Yeah.
but I was really lucky. I met a mutual friend of ours, Craig, at the
Oh,
Titanic
yeah.
convention in August, and he introduced me to Paul Burns. And
Oh,
Paul
yeah.
Burns was doing a little demo with Madeline Astor's life
Mhm.
belt for
Now
us
we
all to
have it
see.
in the exhibition, yes.
Yeah. And because I'm a very touch driven person and I haven't grown out of the 5-year-old stage of can I touch it,
Mm,
he did actually let me touch the life belt. And I love to pick things up and look at them. And
mm,
I'm
mm,
very much that way. But you don't realize how impactful things, especially historical items, can
mm,
be unless you are given that privilege to be around them, because they
mm,
don't just carry the weight of themselves. Like, I'm holding a mug in my hand, it's a few ounces,
mm,
not even a pound. The life belt wasn't heavy, but what it carried was its legacy.
mm. When we planned the Titanic Artifact exhibition in 1991, we traveled down to Paris in 1990, me, the producer, and the architect.
Mm.
And so we went out to this storage somewhere in the outskirts of Paris. There are these enormous wooden boxes, and opened one of them and brought up a cup, a third class cup.
Wow.
And I mean, I was had been so much into the story, I'd never seen anything from the Titanic.
Yeah.
I just asked, "Can I hold it, please?"
Yep.
Or he said,
Yep.
and gave it to me, and then I said to myself, "Okay, I'm dying now. I'm going to
Yep.
die now."
Yep.
I didn't, obviously.
Yep.
This third class cup to hold it, this just common cup that so many people on the Titanic had used, this kind of cup, meant so much to me. So that
Yeah.
is actually the object that comes closest to me nowadays. It is the cup, the first
Yeah.
thing I ever touched. But after that, I mean, I've become so accustomed to all these artifacts and everything
Hmm.
that's been raised, because we had this exhibition in Stockholm, in South on the west coast, and in Oslo in Norway.
Wow.
So I was there all the time, working with the artifacts. I was quite used to it.
Yeah.
So
It.
one other funny thing that happened was, well, lots of things. Is in 1994, out on the ship, we had raised a couple of champagne bottles.
Oh yeah.
They had been on the bottom for 85 years, and the pressure of the ocean had pressed down the cork, and throughout the years, these sort of steel bands had rusted away.
Right.
And when the champagne bottles came up in atmospheric pressure again, the cork started going the other way. And I was passing the laboratory. I heard somebody scream, walked in. There was our conservator, Rhonda Wozniak, and she was holding one of the champagne bottles, the cork. And she said to me, "I don't know what to do, Claes, because the champagne was sort of bubbling out." And we tried to collect it in a plastic bag. But what could we do? There was not much to do, you know.
Please
So
don't
one
drink
of
it.
those just one of those things, stories from the expedition was quite fun though. That
I think
so
the
that's
story is
that.
more interesting than the champagne bottle at this point.
It's just one story. Yeah.
It needed to celebrate being released from the bottom of the ocean.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I
Yeah.
know.
There's so many things in each one of them has a story, even if it's,
Mm,
a past story
mhm,
or present story,
mhm,
because
mhm,
you think about the context. That champagne bottle might have just been in the kitchen the whole time and then
mhm.
not that special, but it becomes special because it was raised from a
Yeah.
thing. And then you
Mhm,
have this story to tell about, oh gosh, remember, hey Rhonda, remember the champagne incident? And then
mhm,
the story lives on, and
mhm,
things continue on in that matter. And it's really, it is important to continue to tie these things into
mhm,
the present, because it's, again, it goes back to this that same point of keeping things alive. And causing those reactions in people is important. Like, ironically, I didn't quite cry when I was holding the life belt, but that's
mhm,
only because we had just had a discussion about how
mhm,
it was so well preserved because it
mhm,
never touched
mhm,
salt water. And I was like, well,
mhm.
it would be ironic if I wept all over it and it disintegrated, so I shouldn't do that, I don't think.
Yeah.
um but it's important for people to be able to actually see. and identify with things is when I
Mm.
went to see the Vegas exhibit.
Yeah, yeah.
My favorite part of the whole thing was not actually the big piece. There's this little case in one of the second or third room maybe that's full of personal artifacts that were pulled from passengers' luggage, things, cups, plates,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
drink
Mm.
drink receptacles mostly,
Mm.
and just they didn't know whose they were,
No,
most of them,
no.
and a lot of them didn't have stories, and they were all. What I loved was that they were all different. Like one was this elegant picture with this beautiful Grecian-looking painting on it. Another
Mm.
one was just a plain-looking mug, but you
Mm.
then look at them and who owned that? Where was it going? Was this a
Mm.
wedding gift? Was this just your favorite mug?
Mm.
These
Mm.
were things that people were taking with them to a new life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know what you're talking about. When you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned the champagne bottles, did you ever consider the fact that there were quite few, for example, passengers in first class?
Mm-hmm.
So half, at least half of all these cabins and suites were never used.
Right.
They went down unused,
Yeah.
uninhabited. If you hold on a second, I'll gonna go and bring a photo and show to you that you will find more than interesting.
Sure.
Yeah,
I can talk to myself for a minute. Yeah. I'm still absolutely stunned by the number. I thought I had a lot of Titanic books, but mine fit in a banker's box.
it came to my mind now. Let's see. Well, here we are. This is. I mean, I don't look. I'm not as fresh today as, but you see here.
Yes, I've seen that. I love you sent me that I love
Yeah,
that photo.
yeah. You. Yes, that's right. I sent it to you.
Yes, I'll try to remember to post it when I put the episode out. It is
And
Klaus in
here's
the
another one.
80s?
Yeah, here. This is 1991.
91.
Yeah, and this is the bronze boy from the aft staircase.
Yes. The little
Yeah,
bronze cherub. There we go.
yeah,
I'm not
correct.
good with words.
We had. I have. Let's see if there was anything else.
That one's I'm losing track a little bit. That particular artifact is not in Vegas, is it? The bronze
No,
boy.
no, it's not. Well, there are lots of other photos because we did when we took it to Oslo to Norway. I
Hmm.
had a photographer there photograph everything, so
Right, right.
I put them on slides nowadays, but that's nothing. But I mean, the artifacts is just one part of the whole story. There's so
Yeah.
many more interesting parts in this.
Like what? I'm curious.
Well, I've written about you can call it wishful thinking when it
Sure.
comes to the hymn. That's one example, the hymn.
Yes, I let's please talk about this hymn. I have so many opinions because I'm a music person. I studied violin for classically for
Yeah.
12 years.
Ah.
And there's so much.
Mhm.
Never, you start your opinion is going to be smarter than mine. Please continue.
Well, usually when I always keep getting this question about the hymn, I say that first of all, um, it has to do with the nationality of the survivor when you have to decide the hymn. If you're from the United States or
Hmm.
Canada, you will say that the hymn played was with the setting by Lowell Mason.
Hmm.
If you're an English survivor, you will say it was one of the three British settings. So you have to decide first what kind of survivor was it.
Hmm.
Eva Hart, 7 years old, heard the hymn, she said, but she was British. And then
Yeah.
she would say that this is the hymn played in British churches. Whereas this survivor in first class, Vera Dick, she was from Canada, and
Hmm.
therefore she said that the hymn played was the one by Lowell Mason.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. You have to decide what version was it.
Yeah.
And Bride, the second operator, said autumn, as you might know, autumn.
Hmm.
But since English people don't speak French too well, he meant possibly Sanche d'Automne, which is
Mm.
French waltz. Beautiful
Yes.
French waltz. Yes. So he might actually have said that the last tune played by the musicians was a waltz, a melancholic waltz. It could have
Fitting.
been. But here, because we will never get an answer,
No,
Here's the one of the clues to why Titanic is so fascinating, because we will never get answers. We
never.
will only have questions.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that I believe that is part of the mystery, is that I think there might be, as you said, a little wishful thinking in that there might
Mhm.
be some way, somehow we're going to discover, like, the fingerprint left on Hartley's violin shows the last note he played was this, which is the last
Yeah.
note of this melody.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
never going to happen. And I think it's
No.
just like, it's wishful thinking that someday we're going to get a ha ha, and we're just going to get the
Yeah. Yeah.
answers because
Yeah.
science or
Mm.
magic. And
Mm.
it just, we'll never know.
I try to stay sober when it comes to these emotional stories, of course. But it's
I
it's
fail.
yeah, it's difficult because there is so much emotion involved.
Yeah.
And if you just read the stories from the Inquirer, for example, I mean, it's mind-boggling. When we were working with exhibition in Hamburg in 1996, 97, early 97, I told the architect Uwe I had copied a couple of pages from the American Inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "You read these?" "Oh, yes, I'll do that whenever I have time." And next day I said, "Have you read it?" "No, no, I don't have time." I think the second or third day I said, "Have you read them?" "Yes," he said, but I couldn't sleep afterwards.
Yeah.
Because it was one of the officers. He was asked uh, in New York about, he was in the lifeboat,
Yeah.
and he said to Senator Smith, "We waited until it had thinned out." And Senator Smith couldn't accept this. He said, "Why didn't you row back? That was suicide, sir. We couldn't. 1,000 people fighting in the water, one lifeboat. We couldn't go back." So the
Mm-hmm.
word, "we waited until it had thinned out." Yes, that's what they did. And when they returned, they could find 4 people
Poor
alive.
people.
And one of them, Mr. Hoyt, he died in the lifeboat. Only 3 people.
It's so easy
Mm.
to forget how grim the aftermath is
Mm.
for
It
people.
is.
We're removed from it now. Like, I've brought this example up on the show many times just because it's
Mm.
one I'm personally familiar with, which is
Mm.
9/11. I was young enough when that happened, I was
Yeah,
13, 12
yeah,
or
yeah,
13. And I remember the somber nature and
yeah.
how things were.
Mm.
And we're not far enough away from that disaster where we can look back on it
Mm.
like Titanic and
Mm.
ask these questions.
Mm.
And we're still sort of in the grieving stage. And I think being 80, 90, 100 years away
Mm.
from Titanic, it's easy to to hear that phrasing and flinch.
Mm.
That whole, you wait, how could you wait till it thinned out? What a concept, what a notion. And um it's hard to think about being in that literal impossible position that you were just
Mm.
describing. You have, even if you and I were in a lifeboat, just the two of us, that
Yeah.
means we've got room for about 60 people.
Hmm.
And we bravely row out to 1,500 strugglers.
Yeah.
What the heck do you think's going to happen to us in our little boat? No one's, two people leave, zero return.
No, you can't. It was impossible.
It was.
4-year-old Margit Sandström, they lived in San Francisco then and returned to Sweden
Mm-hmm.
later. She used to say to her mother when she was a kid, "Now they're calling over the water again, mother." She heard these screams. And Eva Hart, who was 7, she told me she also heard these screams. But then her mother said to her, that wasn't the worst. The worst
Mm-hmm.
was when they couldn't hear any more screams.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, yeah.
I
But this
mean,
is what she told me, Eva. And I heard it from other survivors too.
it's
It's
I've
hard.
never.
No, yeah, it's hard. It's difficult. And then you think of all the romance involved with the Titanic and so on, and "I'll never let you go" and all these things. But these were people who lived and died there. They were real people.
I
And
called it dream washing in a
mm,
previous episode,
mm-hmm,
and it's something that I think happens when you turn any historical event into a movie or a TV show
mm-hmm,
with some
mm-hmm,
fictionalized, and it's no one's fault, I don't think, because I think they're wonderful ways to tell stories, And I think it becomes this thing where by introducing it, uh, crossing it over slightly into that line of fiction,
Mm,
it allows for a little bit of that dream washing is the silly word I'm using because I don't have
mm,
a real word. Rose colored glasses in retrospect, where you kind of, as you
mm,
said, look back
mm,
with romance because it's been
mm,
shown to you with romance, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing. But as you said, it's about these women and children who, it's not about what song was playing at the end of the day. It was the sound of screaming and then the sound
mm,
of silence.
yeah.
And
I have researched and written a book about what happened in the Baltic in 1945
mhm,
and the greatest sea disaster of all time, Wilhelm Gustloff. And I've interviewed several people, several survivors from Wilhelm Gustloff. I don't think
mhm,
there's hardly anybody alive today, but the stories they told me, because this was in January, there was a storm, there was snow, minus 18. It's
sheesh.
incredible that people could survive. And we had people living here in Sweden that I interviewed, and also in Germany. Um, and It was heartbreaking, really heartbreaking. One of the survivors told me that the worst of all, because they think there were possibly 5,000 children aboard this ship, Wilhelm Gustloff. There were over 10,000 people aboard,
Yeah.
and they managed to save about 1,000. So almost 10,000 people died. But one of the survivors, Eva Rothschild, told me that the worst of it all was she was sitting in the lifeboat and then she saw these children. They had life jackets, but they were too big. So they turned these children upside down and she saw their feet floating by, sticking up from the water. Yes.
Oh my god.
Yeah, yeah, and this is something other survivors have told as well about. And when I think of it, this enormous catastrophe that was never talked about because this was war. This was
Yeah.
1945, end of the war. And they were forbidden to talk about it to start with. And then after that, no one um, wanted to hear about disasters in Germany. But I was in a meeting in 1995, the 50th anniversary, and then I met 200 survivors and people from the rescue ships. And this was incredible. And then I had to put Titanic in a perspective because there was no romance with the Wilhelm Gustloff, no nothing. They were just refugees trying to save their lives. They had nothing left but their own lives. They had left everything,
Yeah.
just fleeing. And it was January, and it is just sheer horror all the way. Um, and I wrote a book in Swedish here that has been translated into English called Sea of Death. It's very much about Wilhelm Gustloff, but it's so different from the Titanic. Very much different. There's no romance, no orchestra playing. There's no shimmer over the whole story. It's just
No.
disaster.
I'm not super familiar with maritime history, but
Yeah.
that reminds me of one disaster that I keep bringing up, which is reasonably
Mm,
modern, and that's the 2014 sinking of the Seawall ferry.
mm,
And it very much reminds me of that. And that there was no romance or shimmer
no.
glory, or that was
Mm,
just school children and families
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
dying
mm,
on camera.
mm.
And
But
we, ugh,
you know, therefore you have. If you look at Titanic, I can understand why she's become so big because
sure,
there is this story, or 712 stories, 712 survivors.
yes,
Uh, and many of them could tell stories. And there is a large deal of romance with rich people and romantic stories and so on and so on.
yeah.
And I can understand why this has become so popular.
There's there is a lot of reasons why it is popular, and on like we discussed, on the one hand, it is good because it does keep the stories of the people who survived, and
Mm,
equally importantly, the people that were lost,
mm,
whose those are the people that I not to say that there's anything wrong with survivors. I mean, that's not what that was trying to say. But I've, I'm interested in the people whose stories were just ended. You know,
Mm.
there were probably people who were coming to America for good reasons, and there's people
Yes.
who are coming for awful reasons, and
Mm.
people coming
Mm.
on a whim because they have nothing else to do. And
Mm.
who were you? What did
Mm.
you want to do?
Mm.
What were you going to be? Who would you have become?
Mm.
It's fun isn't the word that I want,
Mm.
but I like to
Yeah,
think about that.
if you think of, I've studied a couple of the Swedish male survivors who said that this is not unique. We have about 100 persons, male survivors, who said the
Mhm.
same, that I jumped into the water
Yeah.
and swam to lifeboat. One of them, he had picked up his fiancée in South Sweden, and in one way or the other, they got lost. And he had stepped into boat 15 on the starboard side. And when he came to the Carpathia, he realized that she was gone. Then he had to rebuild his memory. He had to tell a different story. He had to say, I placed her in a lifeboat that capsized, but no such thing happened.
No.
No lifeboat capsized, except for boat A and
Right.
boat B. But he he couldn't tell the true story. And another Swedish passenger was traveling with his sister and his niece, and they both died. And in New York, he met his brother in law, who
Right.
had lost his wife and his daughter. Could he then say, I stepped into a lifeboat and left them to die on the Titanic? No, he couldn't. He had to redo his story. He had to rebuild his memory. He had to construct a completely new story. And
I
then you
wonder
think
how many
of,
people that happened to.
yeah, and then they had to live with their memory, the memory they tried to erase, but they couldn't. They tried to build up something new, but possibly somewhere deep down in their memory was the true story, the real story. And it must have been traumatizing
Yeah.
for so many of them with this guilt, living with guilt for 30, 40, 50 years.
Because even now almost, but especially then, it was a time where male survival was
Mm.
vilified. Even if you had boarded completely legitimately, or, you know,
Mm.
especially in the earlier boats when they were much more lenient, you know, even if you
Yeah.
had complete and utter reason to be on this boat, and even if they picked you up and thrown you in there just to make a point about getting people on the
Mm.
lifeboats, there's no way that story paints you as a hero when you make it to New York.
Yeah, I know. And there were still so many seats left unused in lifeboats. Did you know, by the way, that there were 333 women saved and 323 men? So it's a difference of 10
10.
people. If you count the children, boys as men and girls as women, the
Hmm.
difference is 6 people. And this story couldn't be told in 1912
No.
because you had to tell the story of those men who stood back and so on and so on. But it is a fact.
If you follow only the narrative, you would think that
Mm.
the ratio is probably closer to 75-25, just
But
based on the
it's not.
vernacular.
It's not.
No, I didn't. I didn't know it was that interesting is
No,
not the right word, but yeah, until someone tells you, you don't know.
no. I know. I know. But I was. It's a friend of mine who has a photographic memory, and he's helped me to build up the statistics and everything. And
Hmm.
years and years ago, he pointed out, did you know that there's only a difference between 10 people between saved women and saved men?
I
I,
probably would have walked into a wall
yeah.
if someone had told me that
Mm,
unexpectedly.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, but it's a fact. And
Jeez.
then also, it was stigmatizing for men to survive, and therefore they
Yes.
had to say that I jumped into the water, when in fact so many lifeboats were half empty.
Hmm. And
And also, you have the difference between the port side and the starboard
starboard
side.
side.
And I guess you know that on the port side, Second Officer Lightoller was in charge,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't let any men into the
No.
boat. And on the starboard side, First Officer Murdoch was in charge, and if there was room, any man could
Good
step
board.
in. And in the aftermath, it's like this, that over 80% of the surviving males, passenger
Mm-hmm.
males, they had their lives thanks to William Murdoch, who died
Yes.
himself. But
He.
definitely not as being shown in Cameron's film.
No.
We had
And
we had an issue,
wow.
Cameron and myself, when we talked about this, but
I bet, and the reason I was going to say this because Craig also told favorite's the wrong word. First Officer Murdoch is my Titanic person, if that
it
makes
is
sense.
cool. He was doing what you shouldn't name anybody hero because then you can't study them, you can't do scientific research. But he worked putting himself as a second person and everybody else as first persons.
Mm-hmm.
And his task, he fulfilled the task of saving as many persons as possible. And he's
Yeah.
actually the person who saved most people from the Titanic. He
Yeah.
did.
He is.
He died when he disappeared in the water, but he did not use his firearm. He didn't shoot anybody. He didn't commit suicide. This is
Yeah.
absolutely false.
My biggest issue with the film,
Yeah.
suicide aside, just because I don't like to get into
Mm.
that's a big thing about mental health, but my issues with the whole portrayal were that up till then the reason he committed suicide was because he'd shot another person, which was
Yeah.
like that seems unlikely, and the reason he shot another person was and he was agitated over the guilt of a bribe, which also seems out of
Mm.
character. So it's like we started down this really dicey path, and long story short, but he was my favorite character in the movie when I was younger, because when I was younger I
Mm.
was just like, oh, he's cute. And then
Yeah.
I got older, and when I heard about the controversy and started actually researching him
Mm.
and his story, he became a very compelling figure to me. So he
Mm.
actually stays kind of front of my mind at all
Mm.
times when I'm doing this research.
Uh, uh, James Cameron didn't write the script himself.
Right.
I'm going to show
Well,
you
it's
the
never a
manuscript.
one man's job.
No, I'm going to show you the manuscript here and see what you think about this. You see the name there?
That would have been such a wild film if he'd have been involved. Sorry, am I allowed to say what it says out loud?
Yes, of course.
That says Titanic, James Cameron and Quentin Tarantino.
Hmm. Yes, and I have the manuscript here. So,
Wonderful.
yeah. So there you are. No wonder why there is blood and murder in the film.
I have a friend who plays roller derby. Her roller derby name is Tarantina, so I'm going to
Mhm.
be sending her that fact immediately. She's going to be so mad that I've managed to weave Titanic into her life again.
But
Um,
when you approach Hollywood, they would say there are different versions of the manuscript, and they
well,
don't want to acknowledge this at all. But I have the manuscript here, and I've had it ever since it was printed. It was not meant for circulation at all, but a friend of mine, now
mm,
deceased, in Southampton, got hold of it and sent it to me. And we've actually had it on display in an exhibition I made with the National Maritime Museum of Cornwall in Falmouth. So we had it
amazing.
there, and it was shown there. And I
I would
also
love to see.
had it in my book from 2008. So it has been published, yes. So it's not a hidden fact. But
Amazing.
yeah, I know. But now you know.
I do.
Hmm.
It's and like we said earlier, historical stuff aside, the movie Titanic is a beautiful,
Hmm.
well done
Extremely well.
movie. And it's fun, it's a good story. I do have to say I think it is a really well done visual, even if it's not 100% accurate all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very well done visual representation of the size and grandeur of
Hmm.
Titanic. And even if it's not totally accurate, you get how opulent it was. You get an idea of how big
Hmm.
it it
Yes. Yeah.
she was. I
And
say it.
I think there will be new films made about the Titanic in days to come.
What year do you think we're going to see our next Titanic film?
More on the personal side, I'd say.
That's fair.
And also, of course, the wreck. Of course, but I would say if there is going to be a movie, it has to be a personal story, something like that.
I'd love to see. I think biopic is the word that I want.
Mm?
I'd love to see a biopic of obviously, again, Murdoch's my favorite, so I'd love to see a biopic of him, but of any of the Lightoller, I'm sure would be a fascinating one, being as he was the highest ranking survivor. I'm sure there's quite a story there, but
Mhm.
it would
Well,
be wonderful to see a story like that.
it's difficult with Ayatollah,
Oh, I'm
very
sure.
difficult, because he denied so many men to go into the lifeboats. So I
Yeah.
have plenty of stories from survivors who saw men being held back.
Uh,
And
he was
life.
just an example, but like someone whose story to tell on a micro level,
Mhm.
taking a
Yeah.
closer look at them.
And if you look at the staff from the a la carte restaurant,
Mm.
um, it's very tragic, because I
Let's
think they were held back.
and
Physically held back.
Angelica and I got into this a little bit discussing the
Mhm.
Paracchio brothers, and
Mhm.
first
Yes.
of all, they were so young. Everyone in that restaurant, just
Yeah. And
boys.
I have some um, examples pointing at that they were actually locked in.
Oh
It's
no.
impossible to prove completely, because nobody of the surviving crew would say anything about it. But there are hints of this happening. That first of all, they were held back, and then that they couldn't even get out.
There is an unspeakable amount of terror
Hmm.
that must come with the notion that, first of all, disaster is impending, and
Hmm.
second of all, that some people out there thought so little of you that they denied you your chance to fight for your
Hmm.
own
Hmm.
survival.
Hmm.
It's, that there's an incredible romance that comes with the story, and I think a lot of it is not even if it's unintentional, it is to disguise the fact that during a disaster, horrible, disastrous, and ugly things happen,
Hmm. Yes.
and they're not just flukes.
No, I know, I know.
And I know I hate to end things on a super downer note, but it's it's
No,
it's
don't.
it's it's the notion that it is a human story,
Mm,
and
don't. Titanic is a bright future.
it does. People
Yeah.
love it, but ignoring the fact that things like heavily racially motivated
Mm.
hate crimes might have happened doesn't do the story any favors.
No.
And ugly or not, it's important to acknowledge. But I do have a final question for you, and I
Mm.
asked the same question to George Behe. And my question is, because you mentioned younger people.
Mm.
For people who are younger, like I'm in my early 30s, so I'm
Mm.
referring to anyone like 40 and below by quote unquote younger.
Mm.
What is important to people who are newer to the Titanic world to keep front of mind? What is the important thing for them as we get further away from the wreck? We've
Mm.
lost all the survivors.
Mm.
We're getting further away from secondhand accounts.
Mm.
For all these newcomers, comers, what do you, in your opinion, think is most important for them to
Oh,
keep central?
the first thing that comes into my mind is the human story,
Mm-hmm.
the people's stories, history. I
Yeah.
know young people have become interested in history thanks to coming to the exhibition, then exhibitions I've done, or reading my books, and then I think I fulfilled my task. That young people, become interested in history, and also the human story of the Titanic.
Yeah. Well, class, I learned so much
Thank you.
in just this time. I now need to get as many of your books that are out in English as I can, because
Mhm.
there's so much people can learn, not just from reading your books, but by looking at your work. And I highly encourage anyone who is near the exhibition, which is now in New York,
Mhm.
to go ahead and go see
Mhm.
that and keep an eye
Mhm.
on its future
Mhm.
destinations for where it will be, when it might be coming to a city/country
Yeah,
near you.
you can even buy the catalog there, which I have written.
Ah, there we
Yeah,
go. See,
there we go. Yes.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you too for having me. Thank you.
I want to thank Klaus so much for coming on the show and for talking to me about his amazing experiences in the Titanic community and his writing. And I wish that conversation could have gone on for longer. As always, get in touch with the show. If you would like, you can email me at titanictalkline@gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, on Facebook. That's Titanic Talkline. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.